3, 2, 1, and we are live on Counterbalance with Dr. John Kasapoğlu. John Kasapoğlu is something very special. He is a military scientist. We believe in science here at Counterbalance. Dr. Kasapoğlu, hello.
Hi, Mike, and let's go with John. How is it going?
John, it's going fantastic, and it's great to see you.
Great to see you back there.
Let me tell you a little bit about yourself for the benefit of our viewers. And you can tell me if I get it right. You go back and forth between Berlin and Istanbul because you have two jobs. You're the head or the director of the Defense and Security Program at the Istanbul think tank EDAM, which is the Center for Economics and Foreign Policy Studies. Is that right?
Exactly.
But you're also a fellow in Berlin at the German Institute for International Affairs. That's the SWP. Is that right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And in the past, you have worked at a number of NATO institutions, including one in Rome and one in Tallinn. Is that right?
NATO Defense College in Rome, I was an Eisenhower Fellow there. And in Tallinn, there is the NATO's Cooperative Cyber Defense of Excellence. And in both institutions, I held academic posts, yes.
And you also spent a year in Tel Aviv at the Besa Center. Is that right?
Exactly, with Efraim Inbar. Hi to
Efraim Inbar,
if he is watching.
Friends, you're good friends. We'll make him watch. You're good friends with my good friend Efraim Inbar.
Exactly.
Who's now at the Jerusalem Institute for Security Studies. Is that right? Yeah. And so you were rather a unique character. Oh, I forgot your degree, which is very interesting to me. You have 2 degrees. You actually have 3 degrees, but you have a master's from the Turkish Military Academy, a master's in science, and you have a PhD from the Turkish War College. So you are a military scientist. This is not something we hear about every day.
Yeah, I think that war studies is getting more and more popular in the West. Now we see it started as, as a grad program in many parts of the world, but now we see, for instance, like King's College London, we see undergrad for war studies. More and more there is a fusion. I think you see generals who are getting more political scientists, more international relations experts, and you see civilians or quasi-civilians, I'd say, like people like me who are civilians but graduated from military institutions, who are interested in war studies, defense, military. And once upon a time, I think it was unimaginable, but you see nowadays many military institutions, including cadet schools, war colleges, with many scientists, training scientists, actually. So the military schools are no more graduating on the officers and non-commissioned officers. So there's a fusion going on, and I think I'm the product of the trend, actually.
Okay, now you're a civilian. You're working for a think tank in Istanbul, but you also did serve in the Turkish military, and you went to Turkish military. You get to school in Turkish military colleges, right?
Let's use the right terminology, not only for me but also for this generation. I received my academic training from the Turkish military instead of serving in the Turkish military. But this trend itself in many parts of the world is important because the militaries nowadays, many militaries, including the US military, are offering academic training on security sciences, defense affairs, war studies. This fusion itself is important.
Okay, that's interesting. Now, what I love about you, I mean, what I find valuable about talking to you is that you are fully knowledgeable about military systems, orders of battle, the way militaries behave. Weapons systems like the back of your hand. But you can also talk about politics and strategy and grand strategy. So
that's because I'm Turkish. We are born with that.
Well, this is what we want to get into. Because what we want to tackle with you today is whether Turkey is a good ally for the United States. Because you know, as you know, there's a line of thinking that's very popular in Washington these days that Turkey is no longer America's ally. Turkey can't be trusted. I don't buy that line at all, but it's very popular here in Washington today, and I wanted to get your perspective in particular on this question. So I hope you're ready for it.
Definitely. Let's jump into the hot topic then.
Okay. So where would you think, where should we start?
Well, I think Turkey is a very valuable ally for the United States. It is actually an irreplaceable ally. But the most important point is through which lens you see Turkey. So I'm going to refer here at two books from the same author. I'm going to refer to an American scholar working on strategic affairs like myself, George Friedman. And you know what made George Friedman was his first book, Next 100 Years, because nobody dared at the time to just predict the next 100 years.
Pardon me, George Friedman, the founder of Stratfor, right?
Exactly, the founder of Stratfor. So he wrote the book Next 100 Years, and it became the bestseller in all parts of the world, including Turkey, because he predicted Turkey to be a mini superpower. But apart from that fact, the book itself was really courageous, daring. It attempted to predict in a futuristic way the next century. But the guy again wrote another book called The Next 10 Years, okay? And in order to understand the Turkish policy decisions, which piece of many people in DC, I assume, nowadays, and the value of Turkey as a US ally actually is hidden between the differences of these two books. So why a guy predicted the next 100 years and wrote a book about that, and he followed on with the next 10 years, okay? What was the difference between these two books? Was it only the time frame? Book A was predicting next 100 years and book B was predicting next 10 years? No, it was the methodology. Because Friedman believed next 100 years is about geopolitics, okay? It is about Britain being an island, okay? So Britain being an island has to have a strong navy, which is able to project power first. Russia having indefensible borders. So Russia having indefensible borders or predominantly lowland Eastern European frontiers. So any outsider power getting its hands on Ukraine, Russia would feel absolutely threatened. Okay, that's one thing. And these things stem from geopolitics. So the next 100 years is about geopolitics. Just like Turkey being a Mediterranean power, Turkey having strategic interests in Iraq, in Syria, Turkey being at the crossroads of the Balkans, the Caucasus, the Black Sea, and the Mediterranean, so on and so on. But the second book, methodologically, says that the next 10 years is not about geography. It is about people, like the Brexit, okay? Brexit decision, like Putin's Russia, like President Erdogan's policy decisions, like having a Republican or a Democrat president in the White House. So according to which analytical framework we should judge Turkey? According to the methodology of Friedman's next 100 years book or Friedman's next 10 years book. So if you boil down everything to next 10 years methodology, the methodology that produced the next 10 years book, you can see a lot of fragmentation between the United States and Turkey. And I think that's the thing that pisses off many policy circles in the DC and many policy circles in Ankara as well. But let's shed another light on the issue and let's see Turkey through the prism of the methodology behind next 100 years. Right. So here you are talking about a nation, a NATO nation that borders Iraq, Iran, Syria. Okay, that's not something that you can find every day. You are talking about a nation opening up to the Black Sea and the Mediterranean at the same time, bordering and able to project power to the Caucasus and to the Balkans, having same cultural and linguistic legacy with more than half of the post-Soviet space, okay? You are talking about an ally coming from a strong military tradition. The Turks have been a warrior nation for centuries, not millennia, okay? This is a conqueror nation. What we are talking about. And you are talking about this nation took out 10% of the Syrian Arab army's northern deployments within a week by using predominantly its indigenous drones. And many people in DC are talking about the allied harmony with many nations that I respect, but whose entire armed forces are more or less equal to one single Turkey army division. Okay.
Right.
So you are talking about a nation with between 500,000 to 600,000 men in uniform without mobilization, billions of dollars of defense expenditure, and indigenous defense and technological industrial base that many of US allies cannot enjoy. And I would find that nation valuable. Okay. When it comes to the 10 years methodology, next 10 years methodology, the methodology that produced that book, it's about policy decisions. These policy decisions, some we do like those policy decisions and some we don't. Not only from the perspective of a DC policymaker or a Turkish policymaker against each other. At home, when we don't like the policy decisions, we don't vote for the incumbent president, okay?
Right.
We don't vote for the incumbent mayor. We don't vote for the incumbent, like you're gonna have elections in November, right? If I'm not mistaken. So if people do not like the methodology behind the next 10 years, they don't seem to vote for it. But the thing is, the thing behind the next 100 years, the geography, you cannot vote and change it. There are geopolitical imperatives of every single nation.
So let me put to you a thesis that's very popular in Washington, and on the basis of the distinction that you've just made between sort of policy, transient policy, and geostrategic constants.
Exactly.
Let's see what how you would make sense of it. There is a claim, which a lot of people believe, that that Turkey has turned anti-Western, that President Erdogan is an Islamist, is backing the Muslim Brotherhood across the Middle East. Turkey even backed ISIS, according to this thesis. This is not my view, but this is backed ISIS as a result of this supposed ideological affinity, and so on and so forth. And that, you know, when during Operation Peace Spring last October, when the Turks put pressure on the Americans to leave northeastern Syria, there was a common view you heard here in Washington that Erdogan was also working with Putin, and working with Putin to push the United States out of Syria. Now, I think that last one we can sort of see that was really overwrought, more obviously. But I'd like to hear you take apart these claims that people are making. I'm sure you don't agree with them, but I'd love to hear you take them apart.
When it comes to all these claims or frustrations in the DC policymaking circles or broader Western strategy community, I'd say, let's go through a checklist one by one. And if I miss anyone, please just remind me. First, is Turkey drifting away from the West? What is the criteria for that? Go and ask the Ukrainians and ask them which NATO nation right now, when the Ukrainian armed forces are operating in Donbass, in Luhansk, in the Russian invaded territories or the Russian territories with Russian paramilitary interference, which NATO nation is setting the Ukrainians armed drones, combat-proven armed drones, without any geographical restrictions? Which NATO nation right now has the most burgeoning, shining, whatever you like it, defense relationship with Kyiv? Okay? It is Turkey. Then ask the Georgians. Ask them, back in 2008, during the Russo-Georgian War, which NATO nation, they're going to say definitely the United States and Turkey, which NATO nation that at that point and since then did it best to give a true boost to the Georgian military capabilities. Back in 2018, I was in Brussels in the NATO summit. And in a side event, I listened to the Turkish foreign minister. And Turkish foreign minister openly told that the entire West forgot about Georgia, whereas Turkey did not. And I can remind you that the Russo-Georgian War happened back in 2008. Russia invaded a substantial part of the Georgian territory. And in 2 years, NATO adopted the 2010 strategic concept, which defined Russia a suitable candidate for partnership. Okay? And there was all these Obama time restart policies, everything all happened after 2008. Go ask the Azerbaijanis, which country is Azerbaijan's critical link to the West and to NATO? Again, it is Turkey. Let me remind you, Turkey's entire contributions to NATO operations in a geographical sense: Afghanistan, the Balkans, the training mission in Iraq, anti-piracy mission in the Horn of Africa, many NATO missions in the Mediterranean, okay? Happening right now as we are talking, as we are having this show and people are watching us, okay? Which NATO nation contribute that much to the allied operations? So when it comes to Turkey as distancing from the West or not, I think we would need something more than a New York Times article. We need to address the issue with tangible facts, and people should show me, if they are behind this, people should show me if there is a drastic downtrend in Turkey's contribution to the Western military operations or the NATO military capacity. When it comes to the Turkish support to ISIS, again, I think this is laughable, because it was 2014 when ISIS captured Mosul. And in his sermon, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, in a very notoriously courageous fashion, he said the Christians, they have the West, the Shia, they have Iran, and addressing to the Sunnis, they said, you, whom do you have? Okay, and manifested himself as the absolute guardian of the entire Sunni population of the Middle East and North Africa, which stands really vulnerable to the radical Salafi jihadi propaganda. And at the time, there was one single NATO nation that offered a land force for the United States to recapture the lost territories to ISIS. The entire NATO nations adopted a no boots on the ground restriction when dealing with ISIS, and their combat contributions was limited to the air power in a combat operations fashion or intelligence fashion. It was only the Turkish armed forces that deployed conventional formations against ISIS. Let's recall Operation Euphrates Shield and how Turkey recaptured the terrorist network's one and only bastion in the west of the Euphrates, Elba. Okay, so again, when it comes to these kind of ISIS claims, it should be taken with a pinch of salt. And if you're going to address these questions, you should address these questions with tangible proof, actually. When it comes to Muslim Brotherhood, yes, Turkey supported Muslim Brotherhood movements in many parts of the world. Personally, ask me, am I happy with that? No, I'm not happy with that. Do I like this policy decision? I would say I don't like this policy decision, and I do not refrain from voicing that openly in a show like this, which people will watch. But again, let's differentiate between the next 100 years, the methodology that helped Friedman to write next 100 years, and the methodology that helped Friedman write next 10 years. The Muslim Brotherhood thing was a policy decision. It was not a geopolitical imperative, okay? I don't like that policy decision. I don't find that policy decision paying off for Turkey, but it was a policy decision. You can criticize a government with that. You can criticize an administration with that. You cannot criticize an administration entire foreign policy based on that first, and you cannot judge a nation's, a country's value as an ally based on that. This is a part of a foreign policy portfolio. It is an important part of the foreign policy portfolio. Many things Ankara did, I agree with the necessity of the entire Syria campaigns. I agree with the necessity of Turkey showing a higher posture, a higher naval posture in the Eastern Mediterranean. I agree with Turkey's defense relations, burgeoning defense relations with Ukraine, with Georgia, with Azerbaijan. When it comes to this Muslim Brotherhood issue, I do not agree with that. But again, see it first in the bigger picture. It is a part of the foreign policy. Secondly, it is a policy decision. It is not a geopolitical thing. It is not enough. It does not give you enough assets, if you like, to judge about Turkey's value.
Let's talk in a second. Let's talk about Syria, but let's go back for a second to Putin. And there was this claim that that Turkey is allied with Putin. I thought you were gonna. You mentioned Georgia and Ukraine, and you might have also said that Turkish policy is either directly at odds or in some degree of friction with Russia in Idlib, in Libya. I assume in Nakhchivan, it's also at odds with the Russian policy. Something you wrote about recently for the Jamestown Foundation, where you're writing a lot these days. But of course, what's made the biggest impact on American minds
the S-400
is the S-400.
Exactly.
So let's tackle that. I mean, I certainly take your point. What I think was your point, that something like the S-400 has to be put in a larger context of Turkish relations with Russia. But explain to us the rationale from Erdogan's point of view of the S-400 move, and why you think Americans should not see this as a sign that Turkey is moving away from the United States.
Well, I'm critical of the S-400 decision. I extensively published that it was not the best of the decisions. The system itself is a capable surface-to-air missile system. It is from a purely technical point of view, it is a robust surface-to-air missile system. I'm not saying that. The DC think tanks are talking about that. NATO writings are talking about that. It is what we call in military affairs, it is a perfect A2AD, anti-access area denial system. Okay, when the Russians deploy it in some parts of the world, it makes American generals really uneasy. So it is a robust system. But it is a strategic weapon system, and strategic system procurements are not immune to political fluctuations or political considerations. It is not just like buying a main battle tank or an armored personnel carrier or something like that. It's a strategic weapon system. So when it comes to strategic weapon systems, the only criteria that you should check for is not if the system is robust or not, is it compatible to your broader command control, computers, communications, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance system? Is it compatible with your battle networks, which is really important because we fight in networks in the 21st century? And is it politically correct? In the English expression at best, because strategic weapon systems acquisitions should be politically correct, especially if you are a part of an alliance. So I can say that it is not politically correct for a NATO nation. It is perfectly fine for China. It is perfectly fine for India. If I were advising to the Chinese government, first I would advise them not to hide any kind of signs of pandemics, of course. And I would advise them to be more open and more responsible when it comes to biosecurity. But then if I were to advise them about the S-400, I would say S-400 is a suitable choice for them. They did the right thing because it is compatible with their entire battle network. It is compatible with their command and control network, and it is compatible with their military tradition so far. They are very familiar with the Russian arms. And if I were advising to the Swedish, for instance, they opted for procuring the Patriot, like the Polish government as well. I also think they did the right thing, because suitable here in these kind of procurements is much more important than good, bad, robust, that kind of range, that kind of interception capabilities. It should be compatible with your network-centric infrastructure and architecture, and it should be politically correct. But the Turkish-Russian relations, we should address it in a larger framework. Back in April 2016, when the Azerbaijani forces and the Armenian forces were clashing along the line of contact in Nagorno-Karabakh, Turkey and Russia were at odds. They were at opposing sides, and that was really clear. In Libya, right now, they are at opposing sides. Russia deployed 2 Sukhoi-24 tactical bombers, 6 MiG-29 interceptor fighter jets in support of Haftar forces, or the LNA, Libyan National Army, at a time when the Turkish drones are operating alongside with the GNA, the Government of National Accord, the UN recognized government. So Russia, the issue is not Libya, but Russia and Turkey are at odds in Libya. They are at odds in Nagorno-Karabakh. When it comes to the fate of Assad and the Syrian Ba'ath regime, they are definitely at the opposing sides. They are frenemies, I would say, okay? But the difference in Turkish-Russian relations and Turkey's ties with the West, in the Russian portfolio, we see a lot of compartmentalization. The Russians do not say, I didn't like your stance in Nagorno-Karabakh, I didn't like your stance in Syria, so I would not sell you S-400. But in the West, we see that. Right after the operation into northeast Syria, we saw many European nations cutting their defense exports to Turkey. I don't want to name and shame them one by one, but we didn't see the same approach. We don't see the same trend in their defense lines with Saudi Arabia, for instance.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Secondly, when it comes to the S-400 issue, I think there might be a way forward. We can talk about that. There might be a way forward for Turkey and the United States to find a solution, maybe an interim solution, and to find, actually, Secretary of State Pompeo did that. If you look at the wording of the CAATSA sanctions, countering America's adversaries through sanctions, the keyword using there is significant transactions. It happened to the Chinese because of that. The sanctions were Chinese because of their Sukhoi-35 aircraft and S-400 procurement well before they tested, in a live fire exercise, they tested the S-400 system, okay? The wording in the CAATSA sanctions is significant transactions, but Secretary of State Pompeo, and we see in a larger context, Lindsey Graham also joined this, they gave Turkey a way out by voicing activation. They said, do not activate the S-400. Militarily, there is no button that you're gonna activate the S-400 or not. It is a process. A system can have initial operational capability. A system can then have a final operational capability. Turkey's S-400s, I would say, are somewhere in between. Turkey radar tested them. Turkey received the interceptors, everything, but there is no live fire exercise so far. But we see that the American administration gave a way out they didn't give to the Chinese. And Turkey also responded positively to that. And Turkey declared that they were not activating the system yet, okay? I think that's a good start. And we can capitalize on that. But one thing we should understand, that's what I suggest to the Turkish government when it comes to the S-400 and the F-35 joint strike fighter issue. The exact same thing I advise to my Western friends, American and European, about Syria, YPG, the PKK affiliated groups, PKK terrorist organization affiliated groups there, and Turkey. The ratio is the same. First, they are mutually exclusive options. You can have either the S-400 or the F-35. Likewise, you can have PKK's friends in Syria, the groups with organic ties to the PKK terrorist organization in Syria, and Turkey. First. Right. Secondly, people should make rational choices. I say to the Turkish administration.
Can I stop you there?
Yep.
and make sure that I understand what you're saying? Or let me put it to you a different way.
Yep.
Are you saying that you think the Turkish government made this play for the S-400 in order to develop leverage over the United States to get it to stop its support for the PKK, which of course.
No, I wouldn't say so. I said the ratio to address the questions should be the same. It should be a rational decision. Turkey is much more important than PKK affiliated groups in Syria. So I asked for my Western friends to act rationally, seeing that Turkey openly outweighs these groups.
So you're saying that this could be this rational way forward
exactly.
could be a way out for both sides. Whether this was the thinking when Erdogan made the deal with Putin or not, this could be the way out.
What I'm suggesting is that every single part of this equation to act rationally. Okay.
Yeah.
I asked Ankara to act rationally. It is the F-35 being a part of the F-35 program and having this capability, procuring this capability that F-35 can offer. I mean, a fifth generation command control node, a master of network-centric warfare, and Turkey has long been a producer of that, a level 3 partner of that. It wasn't an off-the-shelf procurement, and being a part of that kind of co-production projects is the absolute objective of Turkish defense industries, and it was a perfect opportunity for Turkey. Yes, the S-400 system is a good, robust A2AD system. It's a good air defense system, but compared rationally between being a part of the F-35 program and procuring the S-400, definitely the ratio says, the brains say, that being a part of the F-35 program was much more important. I advise that to the Turkish government to be more rational when it comes to the S-400 F-35 equation, but I advise the same ratio to my Western friends when they are dealing with the PKK-YPG issue and Turkey.
Right.
Okay? Turkey, you are talking about a nation state, a G20 member nation state, a NATO member nation state, who has billions of dollars of defense expenditure, who can contribute to NATO operations all the way from Afghanistan to the Balkans, from Horn of Africa to the Mediterranean. And on the other hand, you have a Syrian group affiliated with the PKK terrorist organization. Okay, so you cannot have the S-400 and the F-35 in your arsenal at the same time. They are mutually exclusive options. You cannot be allied to Turkey and the PKK-YPG at the same time. These are also mutually exclusive options.
Of course, many people here in Washington, when they hear you say that, they're going to say that, well, the YPG isn't really the PKK. That there's actually a distance between them.
I advise them to not to listen to me. I could be biased in that, or you as a friend of Turkey, but I advise them to just listen to Ash Carter, because Ash Carter, in a hearing, I think answering to Lindsey Graham back in 2016.
Ash Carter, the former Secretary of Defense under Obama,
exactly,
said, in congressional testimony.
In a congressional testimony, he used the expression of substantial ties.
Yeah.
Substantial ties between PKK and YPG.
I don't think anyone who looks at this seriously can say that the YPG is not the PKK.
And if people in the DC are saying that YPG is not, it's not PKK, I think they are going one step further, and they're accusing the former US Secretary of Defense actually lying in a congressional hearing.
So now, how many people in Turkey do you think, or how representative are your views? I mean, when I hear you say this, that there's the possibility of a deal here, a rational way out for both sides in order to come back to the cooperative relationship that they had. It makes total sense to me, although I do understand that on the American side, it seems to be a lot harder to walk away from the YPG than I think is wise. But still, it's a rational rational way out. How representative is this view that you're expressing in Turkey? In Ankara, are there lots of people who agree with you?
There are smart people in Ankara, also in the administration, who would see that the Turkish-Russian rapprochement has come to its limits. Back in February 2020, this year, 36 Turkish soldiers died in a raid by the Syrian Arab Air Force. And the Turkish envoy to the UN actually used the term line formation. He said that the Syrian Arab Air Force and the Russian Aerospace Forces contingent in Syria were flying in line formation when this attack happened. Okay? We see it in Syria, we see it in Libya, we see that the S-400 procurement can do some good in Turkish-Russian relations, can help the Russians or motivate the Russians to open up the Syrian airspace for a limited time frame to the Turkish manned aircraft. But we also saw that the S-400 procurement itself is definitely falling short of changing the Russian geopolitical calculus and changing Russia's top national security agenda, top national defense agenda, and top strategic affairs agenda when it comes to flashpoints of the world like Syria, like Libya. We saw that.
Do you think that was the hope when I don't exactly understand. I have my theories, but I don't really understand what President Erdogan was thinking when he went for the S-400. Did he hope that it would soften the Russian position on Turkey in general?
I think this is a multifactorial thing. I do not believe in deterministic explanations here, because I'm hearing many deterministic explanations. Some are saying that President Erdogan bought the S-400 system for providing Ankara, the capital, with some air defense capability. Mm-hmm. Well, the S-400 system is not the right system for that. The Russians can offer much better point defense systems if you want to protect a particular city or a particular district within a city, or a facility within a city. Okay.
Just so the viewers understand that this theory that you just mentioned, the idea here is after the coup attempt, when the F-16s attacked the parliament, Turkey needed a system that could take down F-16s, and that's what made the S-400s attractive.
Well, that's actually
is that the theory?
That's a talk in the town, and I believe that's I don't want to use any incorrect words, but that theory I would that would be political correct, I'd say. Yeah. That would be nonsense. Why that would be nonsense? What if Turkey had S-400 at the time, and what if one of the plotters had breached to the S-400? Okay. Yeah. What if the plotters, because having a Russian system in your arsenal does not automatically relate to having Euro-Asianists, okay, and anti-plotters operating that system, okay?
Right.
So just like the plotters got their hands on Turkey's fighter aircraft, there is no logic to rule out the very prospect of the same plotters could have seized the control of the S-400 had Turkey operated the system at the time, and then it would have been really dangerous. Actually, it would have been much more dangerous than having, F-16s operating in the Turkish skies, because the S-400 had Turkey operated that system at the time, and had the plotters got their hands on the system at the time, could deny the capital's airspace to entire flights. And that would have been a real catastrophe for Turkey. When you buy that kind of system, you have many factors shaping your decision. First, right after the coup attempt, pilot to cockpit ratio in the Turkish Air Force really saw the historic low. So we did not have enough pilots, and the Turkish Air Force is really a busy Air Force. I can say that back in 2018, for instance, when Turkey was launching Operation Olive Branch to fight the PKK affiliates in northern Syria, 1/4 of the Turkish Air Force took off at the ouverture of the operation. 72 aircraft we are talking about to kick off the operation. Turkish Air Force is operating in northern Iraq, in northern Syria. There is a lot of combat air patrol, so they are patrolling. Turkey is a large country, so we have a lot of airspace for our aircraft for these kind of combat air patrol, we call them. In the Mediterranean, they are pretty busy, and in the Aegean, they're pretty busy. So we had enough aircraft, but we did not have enough pilot. It is called pilot to cockpit ratio. And in the literature, I don't want to make it, you know, a military lecture here, but in the literature, the optimum is if you have 100 aircraft, you should be able to have 125 to 150 ready pilots with enough combat hours, enough flight hours, and everything. The Turkish ratio solved the historic law of 0.6 to 0.8. So you had 100 aircraft and only 60 pilots, okay, or only 80 pilots. So that was one of the reasons the pilot to cockpit ratio. Turkey needed a SAM system, surface-to-air missile system. Secondly, Turkey has long suffered from shortfalls in defensive strategic weapon systems. Also recall Turkey asked from NATO many times for Patriot air and missile defense systems deployment. Right now, as we are talking, we have a Spanish contingent in Turkey protecting the Turkish skies against these kind of threats. And it has always been a shortfall. These kind of air and missile defense capabilities has always been a shortfall of Turkish defense capabilities. Though I should voice the nuance here that the S-400, as it is right now, standalone, operating standalone, cannot address Turkey's needs, especially in missile defense, because you need a complete architecture of sensors, command control systems, and everything to intercept an incoming missile. A third hope for Ankara definitely was to get Russians more friendlier with Turkey's policies, and also as a reaction to the West, to the Western political stance as to the coup attempt. Ankara and President Erdogan, I think, to a certain degree, rightfully felt very lonely, especially when it comes to the Western support to Turkey right after the coup attempt. So I think the S-400 decision is the cumulative combination of all these factors. Militarily, from a technical standpoint, do I think it was the right decision? I would say no.
So if we're adding the factors in, adding the factors up, we would say inadequate response from the Turkish point of view, inadequate response from the United States and the West to the coup attempt.
Definitely.
Number two, support for the PKK from the United States.
Definitely.
Number three, which you didn't mention, but I think I would throw in there, is the inadequate response to the West when the Russians downed the Turkish fighters.
When Turkey downed the Russian aircraft, you mean?
What did I say?
You said Russians downed the Turkish.
Oh no! I'm sorry. When the Turks downed the Russian fighter back in 2015. So the Russians violated Turkish airspace. The Turks downed them. And the American attitude was, we hope you guys will work that out. And America didn't back Turkey as an ally whose airspace had been penetrated by an adversary, but rather the United States kind of adopted a neutral position and said, we hope you work that out.
Exactly. I would say that at the time I was a fellow with the NATO Defense College. I know the general view in the transatlantic strategic community at the time. I wrote something, I think, for Adam at the time, and I was pointing out to the very danger of the Balticization of Turkish airspace, because up until November 2015, when Turkey downed the Russian Su-24, there had been many violations, systematic violations of the Turkish airspace. Number two of the Russian aerospace forces came to Turkey for apologize, and on the day that he visited Turkey, there were violations of the Turkish airspace. And you know, the Russians use that airspace violations in many parts of the world, not only as a technical apologies thing, but as a systematic foreign policy tool.
It's a way of intimidating.
Exactly, and the term I used at the time was the Balticization of Turkish airspace. And when Turkey downed the Russian aircraft, I asked the same question myself: had it been another NATO ally doing the same, or if it happened during the Baltic air policing mission, would the West react in the same way, or like a neutral actor, you know, offering the best for two outsiders to get the problem solved between them, because Turkey is a NATO nation and its airspace was systematically violated by the Russians. And when Turkey downed the Sukhoi-24, it was on a combat mission with full payload.
Right, attacking Turkmen on the ground.
Turkmen groups in Syria.
Turkmen groups on Syria. Not these. They were not attacking ISIS or anything like that. These are Turkmen groups, that the people with an ethnic affinity to the Turks across the border. They were just across the border from Turkey, and I think I don't know this for a fact, but I suspect that those Turkmen groups were actually being armed and equipped by the CIA. I'm not positive about that. But
me neither. I should check. But many groups that are in the opposition right now were a part of the train and equip program.
So it would have, in other words, the point is that the Turks could have expected a stronger reaction against the Russians from the Americans, and which is actually a kind of a fourth factor. I don't know how many factors we were up to here, but U.S. policy at that moment, the same moment when it shifted toward armed training and equipping the PKK, it also started treating Iran and Russia in Syria as partners for stabilizing Syria, rather than looking to Turkey as the primary partner for stabilizing the country.
Well, the Obama legacy did a lot of mistakes in Syria. I recall the US president at the time, Barack Obama, drawing a red line about the chemical weapons use, okay? And now we see you had a wonderful show with Ambassador Jeffrey, by the way, on a maximum pressure policy on Syria. Maybe we can touch upon that later.
That was on a rival network. You're now on Counterbalance, which is the fastest
I'm promoting the rival right now.
I'm
promoting the rival right now.
Yeah.
Okay, but that's the thing. Like when a U.S. president draws a red line about weapons of mass destruction use, and when a Ba'ath regime of Syria, when a regime like that has strong ties with North Korea, Iran, that systematically supports the Lebanese Hezbollah and exports terrorism in the region, when that regime number and again violates a US president's red lines, okay, and uses chemical weapons and violates maybe the one and only norm that we have in 100 years in fighting just wars, if there is such a thing, and uses chemical weapons and dangerous chemical weapons, nerve agents on civilian population, okay, the red line that the US president drew should not be, do not use chemical weapons. Otherwise, I'm going to go to the Russians and broker an unworkable chemical disarmament deal with you. that should not be the stance of a U.S. president. Otherwise, you would be a weak president, and some might call you a weak president. Like I would prefer calling U.S. President Barack Obama. Okay, you drew a red line as to the use of chemical weapons in Syria. When somebody passes that red line, okay, the thing that you punish that violation is not a disarmament deal.
Right.
Okay, it is not a disarmament deal. And that disarmament deal was doomed to fail. And we see in the IIT OPCW report, Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons report, that the deal itself was violated by the regime.
Right.
Again, by nerve agents. Now we didn't hear one word from the champions of that deal, by the way.
I predicted when they signed that deal that it would never be honored by the regime. Was that the Turkish view at the time?
Well, Turkey, again, back in 2013, Turkey was, one of the few NATO allies that opened a blank check to the United States. Turkey said, like, if you want to solve this issue by honoring your red line commitment, I'm ready to do it with you. So I think there is few NATO nations that offer direct military assistance and contribution to the United States in the Syria portfolio and the Iraqi portfolio as Turkey did, especially
Now,
when it comes to ISIS.
would you call yourself, when I hear you talking, I asked you this before about how representative your views are. I would
Well,
call you, I would call you a transatlanticist. Is that a fair? Is that how you would describe yourself?
I would call myself like that too. I think Turkey's NATO membership, and in a broader sense, Turkey's NATO geopolitical identity is vital in depicting Turkey these days. And the West, especially the transatlantic security environment, the transatlantic security alliance, is the right place for Turkey.
And so I gather that somebody with your perspective would say that there are natural limits to the Russian-Turkish cooperation, geostrategic limitations to that cooperation. Is that right?
I was talking about that in Idlib. We saw in February 2020, especially when the Turkish envoy to the United Nations openly highlighted that the Russians and the Syrians were flying in line formation. In Idlib, we saw the limits of the Turkish-Russian rapprochement. I think in Libya, we also see the limits of the Turkish-Russian rapprochement. You know, let me criticize my own country in the same way that I criticize the US policy or the Washington strategic community's policy vis-a-vis Turkey. Let's recall the very beginning of our conversation here. I said, there is the methodology that helped Friedman in writing the next 10 years, because 10 years are about people, and there is the methodology that helped Friedman in writing the next 100 years, because next 100 years is about geopolitics, right, and geopolitical imperatives. And I criticize Washington strategic community for not understanding the difference between them when addressing to Turkey, not understanding the very difference between Turkey's value stemming from its geopolitical features and the policy decisions of the incumbent government. I would criticize the administration in the S-400 procurement through exactly the same way. You know, you cannot expect Russia's policy decisions to change its geopolitical imperatives. Russia's policy decisions can tell the Kremlin or the guy sitting in the Kremlin right now to cooperate with Turkey in that part of the world or in this issue or on that issue. That's a different thing. But geopolitically speaking, Turkey and Russia are rivals. Buying a strategic SAM system and paying $2.5 billion would not change Russian geopolitical calculus. You're going to keep being rivals in many parts of the world. Geography would not change.
Geography is not going to change. And by that principle, Turkey is always going to be fixated on the PKK. I mean, this is something that America has to understand when working with its Turkish ally, that it's never going to make the PKK a number 2 priority or a number 3 priority.
It is top national security agenda in Turkey, and I completely agree with that. The PKK issue is the gravest, biggest, nastiest, whatever you call it, challenge to the Turkish national unity and Turkish territorial integrity in the Republic era.
And so, if you were sitting in Washington and you wanted to destroy the U.S.-Turkish relationship, the best thing you could do is to arm, train, and equip the PKK. I mean, you couldn't have designed a better policy to alienate not just President Erdogan, but every patriotic Turk.
That's just like Turkey arming, equipping, and training the Mexican cartels.
So I understand how you, as a transatlanticist, are framing U.S.-Turkish relations in the current context. But there must be those in Ankara who prefer to solve Turkey's security problems within a Turkish-Russian framework, or at least there are factors that are pushing them in the direction of Moscow. Can you give us a sense of how those people are seeing the world and what kind of arguments they are making?
There has always been a strong Euro-Asianist thinking, a school of thought in Turkey. And I would say there have been a lot of push factors from the West, like the, you know, lack of adequate reaction after the coup attempt, the PKK issue and PKK affiliates in Syria issue. So there were a lot of push factors like that. Putin capitalized on those push factors very well, first. Second, Putin, unlike the West, did very well in compartmentalizing relations with Turkey. He said, we have that problem in Nagorno-Karabakh, it is okay. We are at odds in Libya, it is okay. Still, I'm going to carry on with the S-400. And I also think that those push factors helped the Euro-Asianist school of thought in Turkey in scoring a lot of points, especially a lot of reactionary points, because anti-Americanism has seen, you know, the peak in Turkey in recent years, especially with this YPG issue, the PKK affiliates issue. It has seen the peak in Turkey. And I think this Euro-Asian school of thought did well, likewise, in capitalizing on this kind of reaction from both the Turkish public opinion and also Turkish strategic community. I had that reaction as well. Like, I do not hide it. You cannot call PKK affiliates our allies. And when Turkey is launching an operation against these PKK affiliates, you cannot call Turkey attacking your allies. Turkey is your NATO ally. You have a commitment under the Article 5 of Washington Treaty to protect Turkey if Turkish territory comes under any kind of threat. And if we're going to talk about, I said the same to my European friends, if you are making a value-based reaction against Turkey, okay, and if you're going to see the world through the prism of values, okay, let's talk about the values then. Let's talk about child soldiers at the ranks of PKK and affiliated groups. Let's talk about landmines and IEDs, improvised explosive devices, at the arsenal of the PKK terrorist organization and its affiliates. Let's talk about, I'm not saying that the Guterres reports, UN, United Nations Secretary General reports are talking about that. Let's talk about forcible Kurdish language education on the Arab population in Syria. And at least 250 Arabic language schools closed down by, again, like it is in the reports of UN Secretary General. Let's talk about this if you have a value-based approach. And if you have that value-based approach in your arms sales policy vis-a-vis Turkey, why you do not have the same value-based approach in your arms sales policy when it comes to Saudi Arabia, for instance, okay? So on, so on. But the bottom line is this, I would say. Are there people in Ankara who think that Turkey should align with Russia? Are there transatlanticists in Ankara like that? I think the issue is more complicated than that. And in a positive sense, it is more complicated than that. I think Turkey's strategic committee nowadays, because Turkey is right in the middle of international affairs right now. Turkey is right in the middle of Syria. Turkey is right in the middle of Libya, Eastern Mediterranean, and so on, many hot zones or flashpoints of the world, and interacting with many groups, ranging from the Lebanese Hezbollah, Iran, to the United States, to ISIS, by interaction, I mean like fighting them, like ISIS, like the Lebanese Hezbollah. Maybe we can touch upon that in Turkish-Israeli relations. Turkey and Israel are the two actors that head-to-head conflicted with the Lebanese Hezbollah, dealing with the Russians, cooperating with the Russians as to the Syrian airspace, but coming head-to-head with the Russians in Libya or in other parts of Syria. Okay, I think there is an awakening moment for the Turkish strategic community right now. And they saw that no option is perfect and the world is far away from being ideal, okay? And again, at $2.5 billion of arms sales would not make Russia your friend. Russia has geopolitical imperatives. And I think it is being seen in Ankara nowadays.
Okay, you've raised now two very big issues. One is the relationship between Turkey and Israel, and the other one is a question of the more muscular foreign policy that we're seeing from Turkey these days. Let's take them one at a time, and let's start with the more muscular policy. We see Turkey now flexing its military muscles around the region, and this is alarming to some people, especially those who are developing this thesis that this is a new Islamicist, anti-Western Turkey. So let's get your point of view on this. Should Washington be alarmed by an assertive Turkey?
Definitely should not be alarming, because we are talking about a NATO nation developing new capabilities. I think, last time I checked, President Trump's remarks when it comes to the allied defense spending and allied defense capability development, it was, talk in the town in DC that the allies are not investing in their defense capabilities. And some would say, in a very politically incorrect way, many, let's say some, if not many, NATO allies are becoming more freeloaders in relying on the United States defensive capabilities when it comes to it. Nobody in DC could blame Turkey being a freeloader. Turkey has a growing indigenous defense industry. Turkey, back in 1990s, the Turkish defense industry's capability to equip its own armed forces was about 20%. Now we are talking about more than 65%. The Turkish armed forces is a battle-hardened, combat-capable force with a lot of experience. The Turkish army, the land forces in our lexicon, we use it like that. The Turkish army is the only NATO force, only NATO land force that fought ISIS in a multi-brigade force generation fashion, let's say. And compared to many other NATO nations, it is the most combat-ready, combat-capable one, okay? So let me ask the US strategic community here. Do you want your allies to spend on their own defense enough and not rely on the American capabilities being a freeloader, okay? Or would you like them to bury all their guns in the soil and just stay idle and do nothing, okay? So if you just complain about the Europeans as to their defense spending or lack of defense spending, military capability development levels, and so on, that the same criterion should apply to Turkey, okay, first. Second, let's come to the modernization and the transformation of the Turkish armed forces. It is becoming an expeditionary force. It is becoming a power projecting force. Apart from all the political talk in the town, or all, this hypo, Turkey is getting more expeditionary like that, it is, technically speaking, the Turkish Navy is transforming. It is becoming a blue water Navy, what we call it in military terminology. It is becoming a more power projecting, a high seas capable Navy, and it is showing interest in the greater Mediterranean and in the greater high seas of the world first. The Turkish army has gained a lot of experience in fighting wars in foreign hostile territory, like northern Iraq, like Syria. And let me remind you that the Turkish army, let's check the last decade, the Turkish army fought PKK and its affiliates. Iran harvested Shiite militia in northern Syria, the Lebanese Hezbollah and its offshoots, the Syrian Arab army, okay, and ISIS, okay. I would say not a lot NATO armies has gained that kind of combat experience within a decade. And with the right political direction, I think that should be an asset for the United States, as people observed during the Idlib operation. Literally, I'm going to repeat myself, but Turkey took out the bulk of the Syrian Arab army's formations deployed in the north of the country.
And in the process, it took out some very significant Russian equipment, some important weapon systems as well.
It was the highest end Russian low to mid-range air defense system, we call it the Panzer line, in the hands of creme de la creme of the Syrian Arab army. We are talking about the Praetorian units here. We are talking about the core of Assad's forces here. So actually, returning back to again, should I promote the rival channel or not like that? But returning back to your conversation with Ambassador Jeffrey and the double IT report, there is I think a very important point in the double IT report. It says, without naming them, it says the chemical warfare campaign of the Syrian Arab armed forces was not conducted by a rogue general, a rogue unit, or a splinter group. the regime conducted and the Syrian Arab army conducted its chemical warfare operations even after the chemical disarmament deal within the chain of command, of the Syrian Arab armed forces, starting from the commander-in-chief, from President Assad, to the corporal sitting in the Hama military air base or in the Shayrat base. Okay, so that tells us something. In the reconstruction period of that country, we're gonna have a huge problem because we're gonna have the core, the Praetorian core of the Syrian Arab army, okay, sanctioned by the West due to crimes against humanity. And during the reconstruction period, okay, we have to tackle and we have to, solve the problems stemming from the Syrian Arab army. So who can offer the best capabilities to the United States in handling that problem? Maybe there is a NATO nation bordering Syria who has the ability, depending on indigenous capabilities, to take out an important proportion of the Syrian Arab army. Maybe that nation happens to be a NATO nation at the same time.
Let's turn now to the question of Turkish-Israeli relations. We've seen a lot in the last few years, a lot of tension between Ankara and Jerusalem. And I want to get your understanding of this. Are we witnessing a historic shift in relations between Turkey and Israel? Are these two countries drifting apart, never to come back together again? Or are there geostrategic imperatives that will bring them back together, in your view? In Washington, as I mentioned, the rise of the more assertive Turkey, combined with these tensions with Israel, has a lot of people worried. Should Washington be worried?
Again, like 10 years, 100 years, geopolitical imperatives and policy decisions. The drift between Turkey and Israel happened due to the 10 years paradigm. It happened due to policy decisions. There could have been another way forward for the two nations. I recall 1990s, I recall the Reliant Mermaid drills, for instance, in the Mediterranean between the United States Navy, the Israeli Navy, and the Turkish Navy. Back in recent years in Iraq, I think close to Bashika, a Turkish main battle tank, an M60, was hit by ISIS, by an anti-tank guided missile. We had no casualties there because the tank was modernized by the Israelis back in 1990s and it had an explosive reactive armor. Okay, so what I'm trying to say is like the Turkish-Israeli Defense Cooperation produce tangible, fruitful results. And let me remind you that, like, if Turkey had not had the 2000 financial crisis, today the Turkish choice of strategic defensive weapon would not have been Patriot or Eurosam or the S-400, but it would have been the Israeli-made Arrow system, and it was going to be a co-production. And the Turkish choice for main battle tanks to arm its army was going to be the Merkava family, actually. So, and when it comes to, technology transfer and co-production, the Israelis, just like the South Koreans, were really open compared to the Europeans, even the Americans, I would say. For Israel also, it was, the strategic partnership in the region, and I think it worked for both of them. Then there came the policy decision. Again, one can criticize Israel for what's happening in the Palestinian populated territories. One can criticize many. I have seen Israelis criticizing their own government when it comes to handling the Palestinian issue. Again, the Turkish incumbent administration is a conservative one. This is not a secret. And they have, let's say, more sensibility to the Palestinian issue, more sensitivity as to the Palestinian issue compared to other Turkish administrations. And then came the drift between, the famous Davos drift between President Perez and then Prime Minister Erdogan. And then the Mavi Marmara affair, the flotilla incident happened, so on. Just like a horror tunnel, the Turkish-Israeli relations, everything fed into each other. One negative factor led to another negative factor, like that. So we have that mess right now to deal with. But again, I'm hopeful for that. What makes me that hopeful is this. First, again, not policy decisions, but geopolitical things make these two nations come closer again after a decade. Let me ask you, which two countries in the Middle East right now, okay, perceive utmost threat from North Korean weapons of mass destruction and ballistic missile proliferation technology pouring into Syria and Iran? Which two countries in the Middle East would perceive utmost threat from them? Okay. Which two countries in the Middle East do not like to see Iran harvested Shiite militia pouring into Syria? Which two countries in the Middle East would not like to see an IRGC Quds forces take over in the Syrian Arab army? And the Syrian Arab army going into that direction. Let me go one step further. Which two nations in the Middle East or elsewhere in the world hit the Lebanese Hezbollah and Iran harvested militia on Syrian soil, deliberately and directly?
That's a really important point. The full extent of the tensions of the conflict between Iran and Turkey in Syria has not fully registered here in Washington. The extent to which Turkey fought directly against Hezbollah in the last round of fighting didn't really register here in Washington. Some people didn't want to register it, I think, because back in October, during Operation Peace Spring, the same people who were saying that Turkey's now working with Putin were also saying that Turkey is opening the door to Iranian domination of Syria. Now that's clearly false. But so the fighting between the Turkish forces and Hezbollah on the ground in Idlib didn't get a lot of attention here. How many Hezbollah fighters do you think Turkey killed during the last round of fighting?
The Lebanese Hezbollah fighters plus Iran harvested Shiite militia, I would say in thousands. And even before that, during Operation Olive Branch back in 2018, there were some armed harassment on the Turkish logistical convoys doing their logistical work to the combat formations in the frontier. And the Turkish Air Force and Turkish artillery immediately reacted by hitting them. And they were also Iran harvested militia. So, you know, like, I'm gonna go with an analogy. Like, you can live in the same street in Tel Aviv, two people just, you know, falling apart from that reason for another reason. But if it is the perfect match, it has to happen. And one day it's gonna happen, okay? I think when it comes to these kind of strategic alignment issues, the geopolitical imperatives and the changing political military landscape in the region, we have hope for that. I recently read the piece by Seth Fransman when I was writing for the Jerusalem Post. He was my editor, a very good scholar. He wrote also about the hope in Turkish-Israeli relations. We see that the Israeli diplomatic mission in Turkey is getting more, you know, active in Turkey, referring to the need for rejuvenation of these relations or repair of these relations. So I think we should go, again, beyond the methodology behind next 10 years here. We should go beyond the day-to-day policy decisions, and we should just graduate the issue to a whole new level of geopolitical imperatives. When it comes to geopolitical imperatives, I see two nations, again, to repeat myself, who are really concerned about the North Korean entry and North Korean entry points, North Korean military technology entry points into the Middle East. We see two nations who are really concerned about the Quds forces activities, proxy warfare activities. We see two nations who have absolute strategic interest in shaping the security sector reform in Syria after the war, how the Syrian Arab army would look like. Okay, that would be a key question for Turkey and also for the Israelis. And I think you know, these kind of security issues will inevitably bring the two together.
Well, that's a very hopeful note on which to close. I certainly hope you're right that these geostrategic imperatives are pushing the two countries together, or will push the two countries together. But even if Israel and Turkey don't get there on their own, on the basis of these shared interests that you have laid out, one can see how the United States might work to capitalize on those shared interests and to, if not bring Turkey and Israel closer together, at least have them working in parallel toward a common goal. I really want to thank you for all the time that you gave me here in this interview. You've given us a lot to think about. And I hope that you and I will be seeing each other in person soon. And I hope it's here in Washington.
Hopefully after, when this pandemic is over, when the world starts again, like functioning together, let's do that in the same studio, drinking something together and addressing the people like that, saying that we can do it in a better world. Why not?